Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Black Representation and Solidarity in the SWANA MENA region panel. I am Sara Trad, the Director of Programming at MENA Film Festival. I am going to take a second to read a land acknowledgement and introduce all of our panels and moderator. So I'm going to jump right into it so that we can give everyone time to have a really thorough and inspiring conversation. At MENA Film Festival, we acknowledge that this festival takes place on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. As a festival presenting various diasporic views about belonging and displacement, we recognize the deep resonance of these themes with the land on which we gather, live, and work. MENA's organization is an ongoing process of learning how to decolonize our work and support Indigenous communities across Turtle Island. MENA Film Festival's support of land back movements and its aims to decolonize the cinema landscape shows our community's shared goals. We stand in solidarity with the diverse Indigenous communities of the MENA SWANA region, including those violently displaced and facing genocide in the last year. MENA stands with our Palestinian, Lebanese, Armenian, and Sudanese community members, their resistance, dreams, and futures. MENA Film Festival understands the prejudices that our MENA SWANA community faces, such as Orientalism and Islamophobia, are intrinsically tied to colorism and anti-Black racism from within and outside of our community. When we center Black liberation, we work towards liberation for the whole MENA SWANA community. This panel will discuss how Black and SWANA MENA identities intersect from Iran to the Arab world and North Africa. How does anti-Black racism lead to the exclusion and erasure of Black identities and histories in the region? Through this discourse, how can non-Black MENA and SWANA community members strengthen solidarity and create space for Black experiences? I'd like to introduce our moderator, Adel Iskandar. Adel is a Vancouver-based academic, activist, and public intellectual. He serves as a professor of global communication and the director of the Center for Comparative Muslim Studies at Simon Fraser University. Iskandar's research and lecturing touch on creative production with a commitment to intersectional decolonization and anti-racist epistemology. In the MENA SWANA region, with cinematic, journalistic, and artistic works screened at international film festivals and globally, including full feature documentaries, creative shorts, and television series. Iskandar co-founded the Black Journalists Association of Nova Scotia, as well as the Council Against Islamophobia and BIPOC Faculty Working Group at SFU, and has supervised graduate students working on film projects at Georgetown University and SFU's School of Communication. I would like to present our three panelists to this space, Nia Ahmed Abdullahi, Alex Eskandakar, and Razan Idris, Dr. Razan Idris. Nia Ahmed Abdullahi is a multidisciplinary artist, technologist, and the founder of Habasuda, a collective dedicated to sharing the richness of the Muslim experience. Her work has been exhibited at Nuit Blanche Toronto, TIFF Next Wave, Black Film Festival Zurich, Gallery 44, Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival, Eastern Edge Gallery, amongst others. She was a 2021 Hot Docs Accelerator Fellow and currently sits on the advisory committee of the City of Toronto's Artworks 2 program and the Board of Work in Culture. Her work evokes memory, both past and present and future, in connection with diasporic experiences and ancestral awakenings. Pillars of resistance are drawn through her divine labor of love. Alex is a DGC-nominated director, producer, writer, entrepreneur, actor, and co-founder of the Collective for Black Iranians. His work includes producing over 100 episodes of The Gifted Gab and directing his recent documentary, Coaching While Black, which premiered at the Calgary International Film Festival and Real World Film Festival. This project earned 2 AMPIA nominations and a spot on the DGC Jean-Marc Vallée Discovery Award longlist. Alex has directed short films for the Collective, CBC, and Mosquers Film Festival, and was selected for the TELUS Story Hive's Black Creators Edition and the National Screen Institute's EVE On Demand Access program. His Afro-Iranian heritage and Toronto upbringing influence his storytelling and business ventures. Alex's last short film, Cycles, will debut on the festival circuit in 2025, and he is in development on his first feature film. Razan Idris is a Sudanese-American writer, curator of the hashtag Sudan Syllabus Project, and a PhD in history from University of Pennsylvania. Razan's research focuses on race and Blackness in international history with a focus on Afro-Arab identities, and she is currently writing a book on race, media, and modern reporting in early 20th century Egypt. I will be keeping my mic and camera off. I'm going to jump in 10 minutes before the end of the panel to let all of our panelists and moderator know that we're coming up on time so that we can pace ourselves and wrap up. And with that, I leave it to all of you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate your very kind and very generous introduction. It's a real pleasure to be meeting today and convening this conversation. I'm very much looking forward to hearing from our esteemed and remarkable three panelists today. As Sarah was kind enough to mention, this conversation is going to deal with Black representations in the MENA-SWANA region, but also thinking about how we navigate discussions around race in a changing geography and across different locales, from the MENA-SWANA region to our current places where we reside. There's no way to discuss this without really foregrounding the fact that many of us are currently in a settler colonial dynamic with the lands on which we reside. I'm joining you today from the unceded and stolen lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and many other Coast Salish nations. At the MENA Film Festival, as well as the work that I'm doing at the Center for Comparative Muslim Studies. We don't say this as a tokenistic performative expression, but rather to basically remind us that we are actively engaged in trying to decolonize these spaces. And I think our conversation today will be front and center in that pursuit. Everyone here is an active contributor to decolonizing the spaces that they happen to be involved in, and that is why I'm supremely excited to be starting the conversation. So, without further ado, if it's amenable to our panelists, I will invite them to each provide some introductory remarks, somewhere between 5 and 7 minutes, just reflecting on the subject of today's discussion, and then we will then have a moderated discussion that will follow. I'll ask a few questions, and we'll get the discussion going in a freewheeling way, hopefully addressing a lot of really, really prescient and urgent topics that are on everybody's minds. So I will invite. We haven't decided on the order. I just realized we haven't decided on the order. But if somebody wants to, lead the way and cut the cord, that would be really fabulous. Don't all jump at once. Should I pull a name out of a hat? I think you're all muted anyway, so if you're speaking it, we can't hear you. Should I invite? Should I invite someone? Okay, I'll invite someone. Nia, how about if you start us off?
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Nia Ahmed Abdullahi. I'm so happy to be here today to be a part of this discussion. I'm Hariri Ethiopian, and a lot of my work centers on documentation of my culture because specifically, not many people know about Hariri people specifically. A lot of us have been displaced, and a lot of our stories haven't been told. I still remember the first time I heard my language in a documentary, and it was just like, it really changed my life. And I want to be able to hear my language more. And I want those stories to be centered, and I want to see those stories represented. I want to see all of our stories represented, to be honest. So yeah, I'm happy to be here today.
I guess I'll go next. Yeah, thank you, MENA Film Festival, for hosting this discussion. My name is Alex Iskandar Kha. I'm an Iranian filmmaker based out of Toronto and Alberta. Um, and our work, I think all of us here is so crucial to redefining and reimagining just blackness. I think oftentimes we view the concept of blackness from this colonial perspective, oftentimes a westernized perspective, and sometimes I know for the inception of the collective, we felt that we needed to take up some space as Black creators, as thinkers, as thought leaders, not so much as entertainers as we see obviously in Western media. And so we wanted to address a need there. And me and the founding members are all storytellers at that intersection in our own right. And often we would see Black solidarity, or solidarity rather, with Black folk from the SWANA region, but oftentimes we didn't have that agency to tell our own stories. Oftentimes it was told from other perspectives, whether it was white gaze, whether it was an executive trying to exploit Black pain. I think oftentimes for me, the idea and the question of who's telling what stories is really, really important. So in the context of solidarity, and obviously, the region has a very rich history, and oftentimes, I think, with Black lives, Black bodies, everybody that's not Black wants to avoid the politics. But unfortunately, when you're Black, the air you breathe is political. So we're oftentimes in the center of a lot of these conflicts, and a lot of these perspectives are rich and critical, and we need the voices of everybody here to chime in, and when there's space for that, then we can kind of talk more about solidarity. But oftentimes I think we miss the mark because you know those hard conversations aren't happening. So thanks to MENA Film Festival just for hosting this. I'm excited to engage in dialogue with all of you, and don't let me take up any more time.
Thanks so much, Alex. That was awesome. Sorry, I didn't. I froze for a second, so I didn't get a chance to thank you as well, Nia. But thank you both. And now, Dr. Rozan, newly minted Dr. Rozan.
Thank you so much, Adil, for being our moderator today, and thanks so much to Alex and Nia for your excellent introductions. My entry point into the discussion of Black representation has very long been through academia. I was a Sudani American kid in college in the middle of critical discussions of race around the Black Lives Matter movement. And I was also navigating, having lived in Sudan and coming back to the US and noticing the differences of my racial experiences between the two countries. And what that led me to was asking myself, how are the racial dynamics of academia in the United States shaping the lack of representation that I'm seeing of Sudan in my coursework in college? I would be in coursework about the Middle East or SWANA or the African continent or religion, and I would just very rarely see Sudanese academia cited, work on Sudan cited. And so what that initially led me to was creating the Sudan syllabus project online, which was aimed at sort of rectifying this issue and bringing attention to Sudani academics, bringing attention to critical work about Sudan. And I grounded that in previous work that had been done, like Black critical syllabi that had been done on Twitter by a lot of Black authors. And so coming into this discussion of representation today, I think it's been almost 8 years now of the Sudan syllabus being online. Now my question for folks is, and what I want to see us discuss today is this: how representation goes beyond just like the token. That it's about much more than just, inviting a token Black person onto your panel or bringing a token like Black SWANA film into a single like festival. Like, what is the politic of Blackness that Alex mentioned earlier? And I'm really, really excited for our very different experiences to come together into this panel today.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Roseanne. Okay, well, I mean, I suppose we can just start off the bat with a little bit of a provocation. Can I provoke you all? I want us to maybe think about how personal Blackness is, right? And just like understanding how one navigates Blackness in these different respective spaces. So I know we're going to end up talking about artistic practice and the work that you do, and in your case, Roseanne, the research and pushing against the curriculum and pushing against institutions where there's an absence. But can we kind of bring this, start at the personal and the slightly more introspective? And I want to ask you, the three of you, to kind of talk about kind of navigating the world through Blackness and the world's perception of you. And of course, by world, I don't mean the world in its totality, but just like your worlds, the worlds that you navigate and what that means to be Black in those spaces on a regular basis. Feel free to jump in. This is like a free for all, not no specific.
Yeah, I think that is a thought provoking question. Personally, my perspective, not my perspective, my existence as a Black Iranian, oftentimes I actually have this is a lot of the discussions at the collective is of Blackness and our experiences of Blackness and how we navigate. And obviously, we talk a lot about white privilege, but me also as a man, I have a lot of privilege as a Black man. But that's not to say that I don't have, I still have all the other regular problems that I think most Black people growing up in inner city Toronto face. Not even from a systemic side, but from a systematic. Dealing with individuals, whether you're dealing with police, or when you're trying to get a job or things of that nature, microaggressions. So I think there is that shared experience that we can all attest to. Doesn't matter whether we're from the continent or whether we grew up in America, Canada, Europe. There's something to be said about how I could be talking about something super anecdotal, but all of us here in this conversation would be able to relate to it, even though we're from completely different cultures, completely different backgrounds. And so that shared experience there is something I don't try to lean into it. I think it's just the default, And so when I think about myself and how I navigate these spaces, I try to look at it as a superpower, because of all the things that you do go through that some of your other counterparts, whether my Iranian counterparts, might also still face xenophobia and discrimination, stuff like that. But I was once asked why I lead so much with being Black. Well, the reason is oftentimes in these cultures that you see, or these countries, you'll see that Black people often end up on the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to discrimination. And that's because it's visible. Although I am Iranian, both my parents are Iranian, the reality is I walk into a room and I'm a Black man first, which means I have Black problems. So I try to, carry that into, the stories that I'm telling, and I don't try to lead with it, but it's nuanced. I think the conversations about this stuff are very nuanced, and Oftentimes when I'm thinking about that blackness, I'm trying to think about, I know that the specificity is what resonates, the specifics of being black, but those things come off naturally. So oftentimes you don't really have to really focus on them, like it's the way we, whether it's the way we talk to our parents, or, when you're walking into a store and, people are a little bit more vigilant when you're walking around, I think these are all just shared experiences. And so, I'm hyper aware of them, but at the same time, I try to also see what else I can pull from these experiences when we're discussing in a discussion about blackness, right? So I hope that answers your question. It was long.
Fantastic. No, thank you, Alex. I really appreciate it. You've raised a lot of really important questions from like institutional and societal and personal kind of, one could call it racism, discrimination, or at least like kind of seeing you through a certain light and then you trying to push against it, but also recognizing the fact that you have been bestowed with a particular kind of, you know, um, visible kind of minoritarian characteristics that you can't escape from. But then there's also like the erasure of those identities in a different context, where perhaps in the Iranian context, blackness isn't something that is commemorated or celebrated. You know, and so yeah, I'm just curious if Mia or Razan want to jump in and share their thoughts.
Growing up between the region, the SWANA region, and the United States, um, and seeing the way that people in both regions often would blame local racism on or try to use other people's racism to deflect from what was happening. So, you meet people in the United States who are like, I don't see why we talk about racism over here. Racism in Egypt is so bad. You go to Egypt, they're telling you the same thing. They're like, I don't know, what do you mean racism over here? That's something that only happens in the United States, right? It ends up being this focus on who's worse, or what's the most racist place to be. It becomes almost like a game, and the game is to deflect as opposed to honor and sit with a person's experience, an individual's experience. Because at the end of the day, when you experience, say, a racist slur, you're not like, damn, would I have felt it less if I was in a different country? It's so I was interested in sort of breaking down this idea that there's a division of, we have our racism over here and that place over there. And I wanted to actually say, our experiences of race are not just, if we think of them beyond just individual prejudice, which is what it's often depicted as. It's just ignorance. It's just one person's bad attitude. And when we start to look at race as having been a systemic project involved in a lot of different societies, especially modern societies of all kinds, then I think I was able to understand things like what's going on with racism in an Egyptian or a Sudani film, and how is it actually very related to racism in American films, and how do the two both play off of each other as opposed to being at opposite ends. So it's a very long and convoluted way of saying I think that modernity itself tends to be pretty racist, and so it's not just a thing of here in the US or there abroad. It's a thing that we can understand no matter where we're looking. And taking that approach is what has helped me sit with people's different experiences of Blackness in different places. So yeah, that's the personal side of this for me.
Thank you so much, Razan. Nia, you want to share some of your thoughts? this question.
Yes, yeah, I can hop in. I think when it comes to race, it starts like knowing that, I guess, especially growing up in Scarborough, as a kid, you notice that from a very young age, even when it comes to just the personal relationships that you build in school or the people that you meet or the way teachers treat you could be a little bit different than your counterparts. And I think you become very aware of those things early on. And I do remember so I would go to Ethiopia like every 2 years growing up. And I just remember feeling like, because I think even as a kid, I would have that thing of like, are they treating me this way because I'm Black? Like, is this the reason why? Um, but then when I would go to Ethiopia, it's like everyone is Black. So like I never had that thought. And I think that always made me think of like, okay, one day I'm gonna move there. And I didn't really completely understand the reason why I was yearning so much to go there. And I think it was just because I wanted to feel like as accepted as possible. And of course, even there, I won't be accepted because it's like, even when I'm speaking my language, I have a little bit of a accent just because, just being a diaspora anyways. But it still felt like, okay, they don't know who I am. Like I seem like I'm just like a part of I'm just a part of it. And then only when I open my mouth, then they'll know that I'm a little bit different. So I think race has a way of appearing especially in being in a place that isn't ours, in so many different ways and impacting our lives in so many different ways. And it's just like the constant drag of like questioning yourself or questioning the space that you hold and how you're showing up and even how you engage with people. It's just something that's nagging in the back of our head of like, okay, well, if I do this, I hope I'm not going to appear like this. Or even I work in the corporate space as well. And I think that for me, it's like they're interpreting me as aggressive sometimes. And I think that I'm not being aggressive, but they're assuming that I'm being aggressive. And it's just like, I don't want it to go that way, but they're taking it that way because they always want to take it that way. So it's exhausting, honestly. I think it's exhausting living in the West. And I love my identity. I wouldn't change it for the world. I'm so grateful to be who I am, but it is definitely exhausting living in the West. Like, yeah. So that's my experience in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think you're muted. Still muted. There we go. Oh, we lost him. Oh, I'll be taking over the panel from now on. Yeah, we lost him. I guess there's some technical difficulties, but yeah, these conversations are so enlightening. I love hearing how other people are visualizing themselves and their Blackness and their relationships to their environments. I lived in Scarborough for a year. I would feel like I feel like that's a very multicultural part of the city to be living in. So to even be experiencing that over there is not shocking, but I can see how.
I think Scarborough is very multicultural, but then at that time in like the mid 2000s, I guess, it was like the teachers were still all white. So it's like they're kind of like even putting us in a hierarchy of like, okay, there's a few white kids, so they're the best. And then these kids are, like, and they kind of train you to think that you are bad. So you kind of become bad, even though you're not bad. It messes with your psyche. I think I was a really bad kid in elementary school, and it's because they made me think I was bad almost. It's very odd. It's very weird.
I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Thinking about like my report cards and what they would say, and like Yeah, it wasn't that. It wasn't. Yeah.
Oh, they put us in a box. Actually, we
Yeah.
had like a box that, like, I don't know if you had this in your school, but they would put all the black kids in like a box thingy because we were talking too much, and it just happened to be all the black kids. We were like away and segregated from the rest of the class. Yeah, and I don't know. I thought
You
it
were
was fun.
literally boxed in.
Yeah, they put us in a box in the
That's kind
corner.
of crazy. That's just.
Yeah.
Ooh, it's funny that you say that because I went to what was originally a missionary school in Sudan, like a very old missionary school. It's called Unity High School. It's been around for a really long time. And it was largely taught by like a mix of English speaking Sudanese and a lot of white expats uh, doing their bit for the children in Africa. And yeah, very similar racial dynamics would emerge. Like, so you would literally be in Sudan, right? Like, with similar dynamics of these teachers. Like looking back, obviously being very offended that they weren't getting like grateful black children, um, who affirmed like how good they felt about themselves as opposed to, you know, actually being good teachers. So but yeah, it's when I say it's global, like
Definitely
so
global. It's
yeah.
definitely global. Yeah.
I mean, can I jump in and just say that, what both of you said, Nia, Razan, actually, and also yourself, Alex, those phenomenon are universal in the sense that we do have a foundation whereby, the racialization is a hierarchy. And that hierarchy is one that always privileges whiteness at the expense of blackness. And there's a gradient in between. Those education systems that we're a part of the reason why we're all able to speak sort of, either unaccented or, like we're able to talk the way we are because, whether we grew up in the MENA SWANA region and the aspiration was to mimic and resemble and look like and speak like and act like, the West, or we're here and the objective is to kind of indoctrinate us into conformity. And that is that has been the modus operandi structurally. And then it's really when we begin to produce work that is in some way disruptive or challenges the status quo or pushes back against the grain in some way that we are seen as, pathological in some way. So we're constructed to be pathological, and then we behave pathologically, and then all of a sudden it kind of affirms, the reality of things. But the work that all of you are doing in one way or another is meant to push back. And so I wanted to maybe invite the three of you to talk a little bit about, maybe we'll do it a little bit more specific. If you can just select one thing that you've worked on or one experience that you've had where you feel like you were able to affirm a different way of seeing your experience or the experience of blackness against this kind of prevailing structure that we're describing. Like it could be, a single project, like a film, an exhibition, a syllabus, just something that you feel like, okay, this is an example, a material example. There's a lot of folks out there are looking for inspiration in those types of works. So can you tell us a little bit about what is, one thing, one of many things that you feel, yeah, I was able to push against the grain?
I can jump in. I would say Coaching While Black was a lot of that. A documentary film. It was my first long form project, and I think there was more drama around making the film than the actual film itself. Here was a story about a coach who felt, not he felt, his players had felt he'd been just done wrong by this system and this abstract, you know, uh, the court of public opinion, which is something you can never really. It's so abstract, and it's just the othering of, black bodies. And so the toughest part is, how do you talk about something that can be dismissed as just all people being a certain type of way, right? This was a guy who lost his job after being on paper a successful coach, winning. He was bringing in a lot of inner city kids like myself to the prairies, uh, which is a part of the job of being a basketball coach, is how well can you recruit? And at a time where, Alberta was still very, very conservative, a lot of the teams were made up of these small town kids, local kids. And that was like the unwritten formula of how to win in that structure. Here comes this American guy, big, black, 6'5", smart. He's got his master's degree, well spoken, brilliant basketball mind. I think he's a savant in a lot of ways. And anywhere he goes, he has a track record of improving the program. And he comes here, does the same thing. But the way he's doing it, whether it's the way he's talking to his players, the way he's dealing with other opponents, there was a bit of pushback from his other coaching peers who were white, who were conservative, who were had a boys' club, and so validating his experience is what we were doing with this film, right? I'm a guy who understood the nuances of being black and playing in that conference as a basketball player. Forget about a filmmaker. And I played in the same gyms. I've been to the same towns, and racism is something it might be hard to point out in like the microaggression sense, but you guys know it's palpable when you walk into a room and people are looking at you a bit different. And so I understood that. I understood a lot of those nuances. I understood a lot of those feelings that he was talking about, but wouldn't be taken seriously because, you go to, a teacher's board to complain. And if there's a bunch of white people, they're not taking that seriously. And if you even in searching for another job, the question's like, okay, what happened here? So there was a stigma attached to him. And so we wanted to find a way to bring this story to the light, and not through the colonial perspectives that we often see, which is like in basketball, it's a commentator watching the game, or it's the journalist who is covering the game, right? It's always an outside perspective. I was trying to figure out how I can give the players and the coach their agency to talk about what they felt, which had never been done before with this story. And so putting that power back into their hands for them to tell the story really was, in a way, letting them kind of come to terms with everything that happened. It felt like this thing that was like an elephant in the room with this program, with this coach, with these players, despite what they accomplished. But I myself, trying to put the film together, I was experiencing roadblocks. There were coaches that were, at other programs that were really critical, undocumented, critiquing coach. They would put up those walls and they were like, okay, no, we don't want to do this. I had a broadcaster that was like, we'll do a feature on you premiering this film at this theater, and they ghosted me. So like the more and more I was getting to the center of like this story, the more I was seeing that people were trying to on one side cover it up, but a lot of people were like, no, like we don't want to be involved. And so in the topic of solidarity, that's a lack of solidarity, right? It's like, I don't want to talk about this because I might piss the wrong person off and lose my job, or, oh yeah, maybe I said some of these things, but that was over a decade ago, like who cares? But it's things like that get in the way of people not talking, not sharing their stories, not sharing their experiences. And so for us, that film was like, okay, let's tell this story so that other people feel compelled to also come forward, because they don't know how their story might impact other people, right?
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that, Alex. Really super, an incredible undertaking. both from the standpoint of what you're trying to accomplish and what you ended up, navigating. It's one thing to try and push back against the grain, only to find the grain pushing back against you. And what you're saying about solidarity is really critical, because I think there are assumptions about the innocence of institutions and social structures only until you produce a work, and then you realize that you might have opened up Pandora's box of different fault lines where, people that you thought were allies were not, and then folks who were never allies are trying to climb atop your work. It's disruptive in that sense, but it is nevertheless a work that lives on, and as it's watched and engaged with, it has the potential to both inspire and cause ripples. So, it's an amazing work. So thank you for sharing that. Razan or Nia?
Yeah, I could share. Earlier last year, we got a grant. We got a grant to do for my collective called Habasuda, and we got a grant to do programming for Black Muslim women artists. So it was like for emerging Black Muslim women artists from all different disciplines. And it started with like a workshop. Honestly, it was just, the goal for it was to create community, because from my perspective, just being an artist in the space and just especially being like a kind of new artist, it was kind of hard to find people like me in those spaces often. Like, always the only one, and I was honestly, it's draining because you get a lot of questions and you have to really, I feel like I have to perform when I'm in those spaces. I can't really show up as my full self. I'm showing up as my full self regardless, because I'm just going to do what I do. But at the end of the day, it just feels like it's a little bit, it felt like a lot, and I felt like there were a lot of other artists that were feeling similar sentiments, and I wanted to get us all together, especially to see if there's a way, because I think that if, for example, I'm on, like, my film is at a film festival, that's great for me, but like, I mean, how is that impacting all of us? Or how can I pay it forward so that other folks will have more opportunities as well? I'm always trying to share opportunities or see if there's ways that we could year, or there's more of us the year after, or like seeing ways that we could, just get our stuff out there and share our perspectives in different ways. But yeah, so it was a workshop series, and then there was a mentorship element, and then it ended off with an exhibition, which happened earlier this month. And it was just so beautiful to have everybody together and seeing like the relationships that have been cultivated during that time, and just like seeing just like the true sisterhood amongst the artists, and they're all so talented, and they all have like, and just being able to create that space. The exhibit was like, yeah, we decolonized that space, and we really made it all about just, yeah. And even like, I think that sometimes when it comes to Muslim spaces too, Muslim art spaces, I feel like we have to kind of water it down, or like be okay, like, okay, we're not gonna have like the prayer space out in the open. We don't really want to see, like, we don't want to see us praying. But then at the same time, we were like, no, open up the space. Like, if people want to go pray, they can see it like right beside where the art is. And it felt really nice. It felt really beautiful, and it was intergenerational, because I think that art sometimes, like, it's not like our aunties are at the exhibits. Our aunties don't even know about the galleries, but we wanted it to be open to the aunties, the uncles, the grandmas, the families, and really, because they're artists in itself. Like, they don't call themselves artists, but they've been doing art, and it's like, it's also a part of a lot of our cultures too. So it was really beautiful. And yeah, we have the grant for next year too, so inshallah, I'm really happy and excited to see what happens and what they make for next year. But all of the artists, there were 10 artists in total, and they are so talented, and what they made was just, and all of them are so eloquent, and just like, they're incredible, just the way that they radiate. And I feel like, where, like, I wish that I wish there were more opportunities out there. But yeah, I know that their future is bright, and there will be opportunities for us all. But yeah, they're so incredible, and it's just so nice to see because I think that they don't want us to get together. They don't want us to like come together as a community and be strong and support one another. They kind of want it to be like, oh, if one person's up there, you don't really bring your other, because then we can't get strong. But if we're strong together, we can be more up, like there's more abundance for us. So I think it's important to uplift each other, because I think that sometimes they might think, oh, so she's a Black Muslim woman artist, filmmaker, maybe I shouldn't help her because we're doing similar stuff. Like, no way, we're not doing similar stuff. Like, we can support each other so we can all become, like, there will be more opportunities for us. And I think knowledge sharing is important, but I think they taught us that don't share you want it, like, it's like the scarcity mindset of, oh, you can only get, like, you're not going to get far if you're helping. No, we got to help each other, because this is how they're trying to mess with our brains. And the girls also know that, and everyone's sharing with each other in our group chat, so it's good. I hope that we continue to grow as a collective and share opportunities with each other. And that's why I'm always about, if someone messages me, I'll tell you everything about the grant system. I'll tell you everything about how I got it. I'll share my grant application, because I want them to get the money. I'd rather them get the money than like non-Black people getting the money, to be honest with you. So I think that it's important to uplift each other whenever we can. But yeah.
That's really, hold on. Okay, where am I? That's really amazing, Nia. I really appreciate you saying that. And honestly, I think this is a classic example of just creating the space and allowing the work to unfold, but also trusting that within community there is brilliance, there's creativity, there's ingenuity, and that the experiences of Black persons in the world are naturally productive of both art and culture and sophistication. They're just so rich and so nuanced in by definition. And so all we have to do is create the space. And I love the fact that you talked about this kind of assumption around scarcity or the structural scarcity and how it's designed to create competition between individuals. And in doing so, suppress any possibility of solidarity and collective action. So that's a really, really beautiful thing. Thank you for mentioning the story and truly inspiring. And I really think that maybe it's also a message to others out there who are listening or watching us discuss this, to kind of follow suit in your own respective communities, in your own circles, create those spaces. Sometimes it doesn't take much, even if you can't secure or get the grants necessary to make this work, you take up the spaces where they exist. There are crevices in the system, like the community centers, all those spaces. Erect the art, put it out there, put out the invitations, use whatever like open source information is at your disposal to bring together folks and also inspire people to tell their own stories and build their own narratives. So thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it. Nazan.
Nia and Alex, those are both such great pushbacks against another thing that I think all of us probably learned in our racialized school system, which is the emphasis on being like the articulate, special, alone genius who operates on their own and is better than the rest and isn't like the rest of their community, right? When, as you both said, actually what's going on is that you're being told that to succeed, you have to be the exception, when actually that is often what will make you fail. Like when you are trying to disconnect yourself from community and from the people who you're writing about or making films about. So yeah, it made me think of, my training is as an educator, and very often I think in a academic system, the emphasis is sort of on branding yourself as like the academic genius, right? The Razan, there's no one like her, right? Like I need to step up here and be like, it's me. And I think that what I've actually found most materially rewarding has been helping students see and learn how to use the tools of understanding and seeing race to look at their own lives and to do their own research and projects. Like I can't tell you how many times I was just blown away after like a class by what students were able to come up with, not by me sitting up here and being like, I have all this knowledge and I'm going to impart it to you, but rather by being like, hey, we are all in this together and we're all going to learn these skills together and we're all going to teach each other through like what we find. this is a very funny story that I usually like to tell, which is I was TAing for a African studies course way back in the day. It was mostly freshman students, like first years. Um, we were, learning about colonialism in East Africa, and I always emphasized to students sort of applying the research we were doing to things that they love. I was like, when you start through something that you love, you will find your entry point into this research. And I had a kid, and I'll never forget it. This tiny little kid came up to me after class, and he was like, Razan, after we discussed all this stuff about colonialism in East Africa, and we read all these books, I realized my favorite Taylor Swift music video is full of colonial imagery. I was like, you're right. And we had a whole, people might like laugh. They might be like, oh yeah, what were you doing watching the Safari Taylor Swift music video? But we were able to have a discussion and be like, yes, this imagery is rooted in like the book Out of Africa. What was the like long-term effects of this white settlers' very popular novel about Kenya? How is it like moving into American media today? And then how does a white woman in the US make her music video referencing a lot of colonial imagery based on that, like almost a century later? So it was that kind of moment that I loved having inside the classroom, and is what was so rewarding for me about the Sudan syllabus outside of the classroom. Like, it introduced me to so many people who would come to me and be like, Razan, I really appreciated like the resources that you put together, and they helped me to do my research. I met Bayan Abu Bakr, who's now a student at Yale. I met Haneen Seed Ahmed, who runs the Sudan like tapes archive, like a musical archive. I met like various media makers. So just like being in that back and forth with people and seeing not necessarily what you produce, but what they produce as a result of your work together is so incredibly rewarding. And I'm very happy to be seeing all of us able to enjoy that together. So
that's super incredible, Razan. And I, as someone who shares a vocation with you, being in academia, this is something that keeps us doing this highly, I don't know. I'm not going to describe academia at this particular juncture in time, but I will just say that what gives me hope and is rewarding on a perpetual and perennial basis is the fact that students are the ones kind of thinking outside the box and prepared to utilize whatever tools we give them and push back against what's out there. But also what you're speaking to is raises a really important point about how the work that's being done in this regard is not irrelevant. It's not fringe. It's not something that should be relegated to those kind of like, it's a very, very specific or ultra specialized matter. Quite the contrary. The work that's being done by either, Black cultural producers from the MENA SWANA region, or Black cultural producers in general, or even like MENA SWANA cultural producers, anyone who's basically complicating and problematizing and helping us, recognize the fact that there is a power dynamic in cultural representation is doing work that is not only immediately relevant but absolutely urgent. It is front and center in everything that we do, and I think all the work that you've described, the three of you, is an affirmation of why there's a need for more of this. So there's definitely room for everyone. That Edward Said, once said that there's, it's not a quote from Said, but it's a quote that Said referenced quite often. We say like there's room for everyone at the rendezvous of victory, but one must think about what victory looks like. So I want to invite the three of you to help us think about, what does it mean for us to imagine the kind of solidarity that we want to see moving forward. I say this because whether it's during the Black Lives Matter movement, and I'm going to be very frank and very straightforward about this by saying that, many of many of the people that we expected would stand up and be allies during the Black Lives Matter movement, particularly from our MENA-SWANA region, were nowhere to be found. And that is something that needs to be kind of recognized and called out. And at the same time, on the issue of Palestine, for example, or on the issue of Sudan, or on many of the other sort of not so complex. I know the idea of describing these conflicts and these situations as complex sometimes pushes us to kind of forego our responsibility. It's too complicated. I can't deal with it. But there are so many instances where solidarity, when it is expected, is nowhere to be found, because we're each in our own sort of safe zone. We're like deflecting attention in the way that you described. All three of you spoke about deflection in different ways, kind of like deflecting this issue of racism. But what does it mean for us to find solidarity now? And I think that I'd invite you to like speak to this proposition that I'm going to offer out there by saying that for MENA-SWANA Black communities, we don't have the luxury of being able to pick and choose, right? We're kind of forced because of the fact that there is disenfranchisement, stigmatization on all fronts, right? That we can only survive through solidarity. And so I wanted to maybe invite you to speak to, what does solidarity mean to you? And where and when do you parse it out in the work that you're doing? Feel free to jump in.
I think outside of obviously I'm a filmmaker, but I also produce a podcast in which I'm a host. And so since we're well over 100 episodes, and it's always been a safe place to discuss these things. I think the beauty of the decentralization of media and technology has allowed that. Oftentimes these conversations are tough because in this framework, this colonial framework that we live in, at least on this side of the world, solidarity can often lead to unemployment. And so I know for a lot of the conflicts and the genocide that's been taking place over the last 18 months, that was a big fear, right? A lot of people wouldn't show solidarity because academics would lose their job, talk show hosts would be deplatformed, billionaires would be debanked. Like these are real examples that we've seen, and it's goes to show you who you can and can't criticize. But I think solidarity, at least from where I stand, has always been showing support and educating. I think number one, being educated on different conflicts in different regions, and they are often not that complex. I think sometimes we have to just call a spade, and a lot of these are byproducts of globalization, capitalism, neocolonialism. And so being able to, when we started the collective, we always thought, if we really wanted to be influential, we needed to control the language of how we were talking about these things. And when you start to dictate the language, on one side, language is power and manipulation, but on the other side, it can be influential, it can be empowering, it can be a way for us to identify phenomena, identify right and wrong. I think is just a very black and white way to look at some things. But when we can point at something and say, hey, you know what, that's a genocide. Oh, that's wrong. And I think that moral compass and being able to speak to that through that lens is solidarity. When we start to do the mental gymnastics around justifications and things like that, that's where the solidarity completely gets lost. And so as black folk, I think oftentimes I hear about these discussions and the lack of solidarity or the pushback and things like that. Um, but I don't find oftentimes that when I present a perspective that I'm challenged, because it comes from a place where it's a knowledgeable, I'm like, this is an academic space as well as a film space, university educated. I think a lot of times we know what we're talking about, but the frameworks that we operate in and live in sometimes have repercussions for free thought. There's repercussions for thinking for yourself. And so, it's the bigger question is not so much about solidarity, but um, just a critical opinion on meritocracy. And if really, really the values and thing that we are in the West for, which is, pull up your bootstraps and work, is that all a fallacy if tomorrow I could say really something that's on my mind and boom, that's the end of my life? Not literally, but figuratively, right? It's like if you lose your livelihood, there's so that in my opinion, is the reason why we might not see solidarity at a high level. Why some people can't is because they have something to lose. But then underneath that is like, just being able to have the intellectual capacity to take a step back and look at this thing that you're viewing from whatever lens it is. And I think we have a hard time being wrong, and like that confrontation with like, okay, well, this thing that I thought was one way for the last 20 years, whatever, however, being able to really in real time say, okay, you know what, I've changed my mind about this. And I always I was saying on the last episode of my podcast, the autobiography of Malcolm X, I think, is one of the most important books for young Black men, especially, to read, because it shows a man's mind changing in real time. It shows a man who thought one way and had conviction about this thing and then changed his mind, and there's this thing and that thing, whether it was Islam or crime or, whatever it was, his mind was able to change. And I think that's what's most important when you want to talk about solidarity, when you want to talk about these discussions about Blackness. If you were ignorant today, that's fine. If tomorrow you're not. And so that to me is I know it's a long-winded response, but a lot of these conversations about, these conflicts, we don't have a choice. But sometimes when you're Black, you're almost in the middle of them, because at the end of the day, ethnically one thing, but a lot of Black bodies are also there on the receiving end, and we get the I was gonna the poor end of the stick oftentimes. I didn't want to cuss on the street, but so I think being able to stand firm on our 2 feet is one thing that would actually give us the ability to speak up on these things, so that we can't be deplatformed, so these opportunities can't be taken away from us because we're standing for something that's morally right.
Thank you so much, Alex. Thank you for debunking meritocracy. That is a universal act of solidarity. I know that but that is, meritocracy has been designed structurally to disenfranchise, and it's built on so many false assumptions. So I'm really glad that you kind of zoomed in on that, because it is definitely one of the greatest fallacies of our time. And we're speaking today, in light of what I just read yesterday, or maybe it's today, like an executive presidential order from the United States that makes it possible for anyone expressing pro-Palestinian sentiments and is on an international visa to be deported. And so, I know you know this, Razan, because it's kind of closer to home for you. But this is an indication that, like, it doesn't matter what you did with your life, how much you've invested in your education, or tried to do the right thing to be able to walk the walk and talk the talk. But when it comes down to it, there's a single expression that can bring you down to zero. And actually, this is, the precursor to mass racialization of communities, because that's really fundamentally what it's about. And it's always been about that. I'm glad you also mentioned Malcolm X. And, these are, if folks are out there and have not read Malcolm X's, autobiography, like, you absolutely need to read that. There's so many, is a professional syllabus, writer and producer. So I will implore Razan at some point to, make some of those syllabi available, or I would suggest, or strongly suggest, you follow the hashtag Sudan syllabus, but also, follow, or find Razan for those types of things. But if you've not read Frantz Fanon, read Frantz Fanon. If you've not read Stuart Hall, read Stuart Hall. There's so many folks out there who have spent, there are decades, W.E.B. Du Bois, like, there's so many people to read, about how the current moment that we're in is part of a very, very protracted continuum. And just when you feel like you're alone, just know that you're not. You're part of an ages-old liberation movement, even in your sort of daily and seemingly mundane struggles. You're part of a larger struggle. So thank you, Alex, for all of that. As then, sorry, I've lost track of mine. Is it you're speaking, or?
Yes, I'd
We
love
heard
to.
from-
Unless Nia, you want to go first. We're good? Okay. Yeah, I think that when we speak about solidarity, for me, solidarity begins before the moment of crisis. I think that if you're constantly in let me figure out what to say about the latest crisis happening worldwide, I don't think you're in a real place of solidarity. I think you're in a place of, like Alex said, trying to say the right thing at the right moment. And solidarity means sometimes in crises, like Alex said, you need to be humble and know that you don't know what you're talking about, and sit back and take the time to learn. And the way that you won't be caught by oh, crisis after crisis after crisis, and what is the right thing to say, is if you are just sitting in your day-to-day life in a place of solidarity with other people. To take the example of, this question of foreign students being deported for in support of Palestine rallies, for example, that didn't happen overnight, right? It's very high. You have to have been paying attention to how universities treat their foreign students, how universities can effectively already deport students through just saying you're suspended for the semester, gone, right, for a foreign student. It's connected to race and immigration in the United States in general. So it's one of those things where if you only pay attention now, you've missed a lot of stuff that you could have been in solidarity with without losing your job maybe for much longer. And it becomes very obvious when someone is using the excuse of, oh, I'm afraid about my living. I'm if you're afraid of your living, that's that's one thing. If you're oh, I don't post online because I'm worried about being surveilled. And if you're I'm not going to have any opinion, I'm not going to help people in my real life online or offline, and I'm not going to talk about this at all. And I'm also not going to learn about it, and I'm also not going to read about it, right? I think there's a difference between those two things. So I think that solidarity involves just being in a constant place of respecting other people, learning about them, and listening to them. And when you do those things, you come into a much better place of being able to understand something in our examples, for example, Blackness in the SWANA region. If you just pay attention to, oh, this racist incident happened today in Iran or in Harar or in Sudan or Egypt, you're going to have a hard time. Whereas if you sit and ask yourself, what do I know about society in these places? What do I know about my family? What do I know about my friends' families? What do I know about the people who I'm friends with? What do I know about the people who I go to the mosque with? Then I think you are able to sit with a very human element that changes you, as opposed to just you imagining that you're going to go out and change the world. So that's my very long rant about how I feel about solidarity politics. So I'd love to hear from Nia as well.
Good, I mean, Nia.
Should I just go ahead? Can you hear me? Should I just go ahead? Can you hear me? I'm not sure if I'm still connected. Okay, thank you so much for that. That was like, thank you so much for that. That was like, me think, and I was just thinking about how I feel like at the end of the day, I don't know, on a personal level, I feel like individualism is really infesting our communities somehow. Like, I feel like this whole idea of, okay, it's all about me, or, you know, just like making sure that we're good, just like making sure that we're good. Of course, it's important to take care of yourself, but at the end of the day, I don't think that, but at the end of the day, I don't think that going back to our traditions, I feel like to our as communities, or as I feel like always as communities, or as holding each other's hands and being able to support one another, and just like community wise, that's how, just like that's how community wise, that's how we used to be socialized, but then that's how we used to be socialized, but then coming to the West, globalization has even, and then globalization has even feel like, okay, more folks to feel like, okay, I'm okay, or it might not be happening, and it might not be, you know, like I really like, you know, like I really like to buy this, maybe I'm not going to take, maybe I'm not going to take this boycott, or, you know, just really caring about, I feel like there's like a people are becoming more selfish, and people are really caring, almost to the point of like, how could you just be okay with that? How can you even sleep at night when these things are happening? And for me, solidarity looks like, what would happen if we all collectively said no altogether? Like, if everybody just revolted and said, no, we're not going to stand for this, or we're not going to do this, or what would that look like? And I'm curious, actually, what that could look like, because at the end of the day, a lot of people are living in that fear. I think we all touched on this of just, okay, we're worried about losing something, but what is that something that we're losing? Is it something that's really a gem, or something that's really important to us? How we are existing in these spaces, like, is it actually serving us, communities, as people, as like the way that we should be living? I don't know if this is even natural, the way that we're living here. This is something that I'm like, just, I feel like it's like I'm combating my soul every day of just like trying to exist within these spaces or these realities, because I don't feel like it's like it's how I naturally should be. So yeah, I think solidarity looks like going back to how, like, okay, like really taking care of one another, and really thinking of what that looks like, and really, as you said, taking it in. And if you're not fully educated on a matter, listening to the folks, and also realizing that the media is half of the time saying, making up stuff, or just brainwashing us, or just really realizing of like, what are they trying to share, and really sitting back and thinking about those things. I think folks from our communities are well aware of media trying to push a certain narrative about us, but I think that just from like on an external point of view, maybe if the issue concerns you, you're aware of it for your communities, but thinking about how it's infiltrating all of our communities, or racialized communities everywhere, thinking about how it's this is like a commitment that they have for all of our communities collectively. So yeah, that's just my thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nia. I really appreciate that. You know, I know that we're kind of approaching time, but I wanted to maybe talk a little bit about the slightly lower risk solidarities, right? Like, for example, I mean, I know that the big issue here is Palestine more specifically, and as Alex mentioned, you know, solidarity with Palestine comes at significant risks because of just the architecture of power in the landscapes in which we reside now. But what happens to circumstances where the solidarity is lower risk? I mean, I would perceive it to be lower risk. So, for example, on Sudan, right? There's so many people who are MIA on Sudan, or for example, you know what's happening in the Congo. Let's, you know, where if we were to drift further away from the sort of the geopolitical kind of, you know, area of the MENA-SWANA region, there's so much solidarity that is absent. These are the types of expressions that don't come at a substantial cost to anyone, and yet most people in our communities are either outside of their frame of consciousness. These are places or locales of little to no concern, or that there may be some intrinsic structural racism associated with non-solidarity, and I'm willing to go as far as say that it is in some cases considered uncouth to come out and say that you support communities, racialized communities in the MENA SWANA region, or to recognize that kind of bifurcation in identities. So I just wanted to kind of open that up a little bit and just talk about what we expect, our communities to say and do, or what we hope. I shouldn't say expect, but I'd like to expect. But where do we expect them to come through for us on other struggles that are not as hefty in their cost, but demonstrate a real commitment to, humanistic principles. Like, what does it mean to, like, the Black Lives Matter movement, for example? I wouldn't say that that's a place of significant risk for many of our communities here, but many of the Arab, Middle Eastern, Muslim communities were kind of missing in action during that time. And I would say the same also with regards to the women life freedom movement in Iran. The fault lines get drawn really, really rigidly around those types of issues. What does it mean to imagine collective liberation? In some cases, it was super low risk. So I just wanted to maybe provoke a little bit and say, what happens there, or what do we implore people to say and do in those cases?
I think oftentimes I think a lack of solidarity is oftentimes a lack of education. I think sometimes some issues are black and white, and some issues are or have been presented, or maybe sometimes have come up in conversations. And I can speak for myself. I'm naturally a curious person. I often don't like to take sides until I know everything, and like to educate myself. But I also understand that a lot of people in our society don't even read the side of a Pepsi can. So I don't expect everybody to, have that same curiosity on some of these issues. But I think, when we talk about the women life freedom movement, we talk about Congo, Sudan, Palestine. You know, um, Oftentimes what I see is missing is intersectionality. I see that people don't see themselves with that framework. That, oh, I am, for example, we have women on this call. So for them, they're gonna see the woman life freedom movement and see, oh, okay, there's women there like me. Okay, so it might not have anything to do with race, culture, ethnicity, but as a woman, you can understand the liberation of women and the struggle as a woman, right? And so that was just one example. I think with you mentioned the Black Lives Matter movement. I think that there was a guilt associated with that, especially from white America, and uh, the pandemic also had a lot to do with that. But like you said, it was very low risk, Um, but I think oftentimes it's a lack of understanding of what's going on. I don't think majority of people understand what's going on in the Congo or even Sudan. It's not in the public consciousness, and so sometimes I wish people had that approach with most conversations, because a lot of people insert themselves in conversations where they don't know anything. But I think oftentimes there are some people that don't know anything about what's going on, and that's where the lack of solidarity comes with some conflicts. But I think the biggest thing is, like, we have to hold ourselves accountable in regards to our own education and understanding. We need to know what's going on in the world. I don't think it's an excuse to be ignorant to what's going on on the other side of the globe. I think it's intellectually lazy in my eyes, and so by taking into consideration that there are things that I do not have an understanding on, that I need to educate myself on, then I can come and stand in solidarity on these things. But there has to be a thirst for that understanding on a human level. You know, there's humans going through conflicts, genocide, this kind of thing. And so why? And by going through those and giving ourselves that framework to understand that, whether it's from an intersectional lens, whether it's from even from a capitalistic framework, you know, we all use iPhones. A lot of the stuff that's going on in the Congo is resources and materials. You know, it's like understanding on a deep level from that perspective, you know, invites us to educate ourselves, and then we can, and standing in solidarity becomes easy because you know what's going on. But what do I know? I'm just an artist, you know, and then with a perspective on all these things going on, right? But yeah.
Quite the contrary. You know all that because of you, the fact that you're an artist. And so thank you for educating us. And I think you're absolutely right. Education is absolutely imperative. And the ignorance stems from that kind of lack of education. But sometimes um, you know, folks are choosing not to be educated or to, you know, I mean, I'm a little bit more cynical because I'm probably in my late, you know, mid to late 40s. So I've seen this kind of like desire to remain ignorant on the part of some folks, or just like choosing blissful ignorance over education in some regards. But sometimes the fault lines, the identitarian fault lines, are too rigid. Like when we talk about ethno nationalism, it's not just the ethno nationalism of like Zionism in Israel. It's ethno nationalism here. It's ethno nationalism in our respective countries as well, where identities are predefined. And sometimes we bring that with us. You know, it's like, this is what it means to be Iranian. This is what it means to be Sudanese. This is what it means to be Ethiopian. This is what it means to be Egyptian or to be Moroccan, and kind of like blotting out, you know, the Western Sahara. Or like there's always like the blotting out. It's a, you know, ethno nationalism is like it's like a violent, you know, ideology, you know, and so it develops its own kind of rigid boundaries. But what you're describing kind of pushes against that, and it's perfect segue to. I mean, I'm inviting you, Razan, because I know this is like your bread and butter. But then we'll hear from you, and then Nia.
I think that when it comes to this question of why aren't people, I agree with Alex. Definitely, there's an aspect that is just like education. Like you need to get educated, you need to find out what barriers are standing in your way, etc. I think the other part is that people need to choose. But this is what I was referring to when I say like solidarity doesn't just begin at the point of crisis, because what are you in solidarity with exactly? Like if you say, for example, we need to like free Sudan or like be in solidarity with Sudan. You know, there's multiple actors in the Sudani conflict. There's, you know, there's state actors, there's non-state actors, there's also like civilian groups who are against both actors. So you have to be coming into that from like already an awareness of like, what do you stand with? Are you, for example, someone who is generally suspicious of the state? Are you someone who like prioritizes like civilian power wherever you are? Are you someone who, you know, what exactly is your stance in your own life in general? And then once you know that, I think you have a place of solidarity to stand on. Whereas like, I think Alex mentioned like, maybe like feminists should be looking at like the women life and freedom movement and thinking about it in relation to like that. What I usually tell people to start with, I think this is again what I mentioned with my like experience with like syllabi and with teaching. I tell people to start with what they love. I think that is one of the quickest ways for you to become educated that doesn't necessarily involve going so humongously out of your way for like, and then telling yourself you can't do it and you don't know and it's too complex to learn about. Like if you are a filmmaker, go home, rev up Letterboxd, and I want to see you watching some Congolese films. I want to see you being like, who has produced something from the DRC that gives me like any lens into what's going on there and who I can think of in my filmmaking space. Say you're an author and you see something about Sudan. You're like, what Sudani authors do I know anything about? Let me go and see what they've been writing or what they've been doing. You're say you're a photographer and you hear like stuff is happening in between Ethiopia and Eritrea and you're like, I don't know anything about this. what if I looked up some photographers from the region and saw like their backstories and like connected with them and saw what's going on? When you connect into things like that, again, it changes not only, it's not just you learning about the world and being in solidarity with this thing called the world. It's about you leaning into your beliefs and allowing them to change you. And I think that that is so much of like being human too, right? It's like finding that, as opposed to thinking of it as like this heavy thing you have to do. I have to get educated, so I'm in solidarity, so I say and do the right things. You're like, how can I just learn about the people who I'm around? And maybe that sounds really simple, but it's what led me into where I am today. I think that there's a really funny quote by the Black author Zora Neale Hurston, who wrote Their Eyes Were Watching God way back in the day. And she was an anthropologist, and she said that research is just formalized poking around. And I think that sometimes solidarity is just formal poking around and seeing what's going on. I cannot see having done a PhD without having just looked at a friend and been like, what is going on in Egypt? You know, like I would not have gotten the tools for understanding Blackness and race across borders had I not looked at what was going on with like Black friends and like Muslim student association spaces and been like, what's going on there? What can I learn about from this? You know, I think that, so for people who are listening and thinking about, well, what can I learn? How can I be in solidarity? I really say like lean into what you love and let it challenge you. And once you start from there, I think there's a lot of things to learn about. So
That's so wonderful, Razan. So many incredible wisdoms there. I really admire the fact that you closed with two words that feel like they're kind of at odds with each other, but they're very much in concert, like love and challenge. Like, you know what I mean? Like the things that you love are the things that you bring closest to yourself, and being challenged is like a little bit of an act of disruption. So, so I really appreciate you, you know, bringing those two impulses and you know, purposes together. So really just remarkable intervention. I really appreciate that. Nia, I give you the last word on this matter.
Yeah, I just wanted to I don't have much to say, but what you said, Razan, like it really got me thinking. I think that listening is really what matters at the end of the day. And I think that as artists or researchers, and I think a lot of us in these spaces, we have that ability to just sit and listen and like think and ponder. And I think that leaning into that is really good, being able to really be open to different people's perspectives on things. Naturally, I bet people that are watching this are probably folks that are might already be doing that, but leaning into it even more and asking those questions. And if you don't know, asking more of those questions and trying to find those communities. As you said, I think I think one of the really amazing things that came out of the internet is just being able to connect with so many people from around the world. And I've been using that so much, just being able to, like, if I'm not sure of something, I'll Google it and I'll find an Instagram person and I'll send them a message. And I want to know more specifically from the people that are living and breathing and are in those societies and that could share it. And they'll probably send you a message back, people from all over the world. So being able to just use those tools that we have, maybe those tools are there to potentially, they're definitely not for us, but we could use those tools to our advantage to really be able to connect and become stronger as a society. Yeah, so I would just say that.
That's incredible advice, Nia. I really appreciate you sharing that. I know that Sarah is here, so I'm just gonna share one last thing to express my extremely deep gratitude for the incredible wisdom that the three of you have shared today. The subject matter is not easy, and it's one that's both deeply personal and also incredibly collective. So many of the people that we know are affected, sometimes afflicted, but definitely you know, impacted, sometimes uplifted by some of the subjects that we discussed today. But I really appreciate the fact that the work that you do in each of your respective worlds is deeply inspiring and deeply provocative. And then the insight that you shared today very seamlessly connects all of these issues together and gives us a roadmap on how to progress moving forward by foregrounding education, by foregrounding love, challenge, inspiration, creativity, and just utilizing spaces and opportunities if and when they're available, and especially when they're not. So thank you all for your time, and may you stay strong and continue to lead us in the right direction. Thank you. Can I turn to you, Sarah?
Yes, thank you, Adil. I'm just going to mirror exactly what you said. Thank you to all of our panelists for just such an amazing discussion and for also being vulnerable in that space with us. We are going to keep showing up and learning as best we can. And, you know, I really appreciate all of you taking the time to share your thoughts, share your personal experiences, and again, be vulnerable. And I do want to let anyone that is on the call know who's live streaming or maybe caught it late. This will also be on MENA Film Festival's YouTube. So you will have the opportunity to watch it after we end the call today. I know that I will be rewatching it. All of you had such amazing suggestions, and I really appreciate. I'm also someone that's naturally curious, so I loved hearing all of the book suggestions, and I was like trying to Google everything like while you were talking. But yeah, thank you so much. It's like amazing to see all of you together and having this conversation at MENA. That is very meaningful. And yeah, I hope that you all have an amazing rest of your day. And yeah, just once again, thank you so much for all sharing your experiences and your expertise. Okay, I'm going to end the call now, but thank you all.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Take care.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Pleasure is all mine. Thank you. I hope we stay in touch somehow. Thank you, Sarah.